Ethan Miller had always dreamed of peace, not the kind that comes from money or success, but the quiet kind, the kind that lived in the sound of wind through fields, the smell of rain on old wood, the laughter of his daughter, Lily. After losing his wife 2 years earlier, the city had turned into noise he couldn't stand. Every street reminded him of what he had lost. Every wall echoed the silence she left behind. So when he saw the listing for a weather-beaten farmhouse sitting alone at the edge of a small rural town called Brookhaven, something inside him told him this was it, the place where life might start to breathe again. It wasn't beautiful, not yet. The photos showed broken fences, ivy strangling the porch, and windows clouded with dust. But Ethan didn't care. He saw what it could become. A home for Lily, a second chance for both of them. He drove down that narrow country road one summer afternoon, his old truck rattling as he passed miles of open fields and rusting mailboxes. The air smelled of wheat and distant rain. When he reached the property, the farmhouse stood tall and tired, its white paint flaking like old skin, its roof sagging slightly, and its front steps covered in moss. Yet beneath all the decay, it had a kind of soul, a strange pull, as if the house had been waiting for someone to return. Lily leaned out of the truck window, her blonde hair flying in the breeze, and whispered, "It looks lonely, Daddy." Ethan smiled softly and said, "So are we, sweetheart. Maybe we can fix that." Inside, the air was cool and still. The floors creaked like they were waking from a long sleep. Dust hung in sunbeams cutting through the cracked windows, and the faint scent of old timber filled the halls. Ethan ran his hand along the banister, feeling the deep grooves carved by time. In the kitchen, faded floral wallpaper peeled at the corners, and a small glass jar sat on the counter, still half filled with sugar, as if someone had left in a hurry years ago. Every corner whispered history. The real estate agent followed behind them, talking about price reductions and renovation costs, but Ethan hardly listened. His heart was somewhere else, imagining laughter, warmth, maybe Christmas lights glowing in those empty windows again. By evening, he signed the papers. The keys felt heavy in his hand, like they carried more than metal and rust. Before leaving, he walked out to the porch, looking across the field where the tall grass swayed in waves. The sunset painted the sky in gold and red, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something that almost resembled hope. He promised himself he'd return in a few weeks, bring his tools, and start restoring every inch. Lily hugged his leg and said, "Can we paint my room pink?" Ethan laughed, nodded, and said, "Anything you want, kiddo." They left the next morning. The farmhouse disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the mist rising off the fields. Ethan spent the next few weeks arranging Lily's school transfer, gathering supplies, and saving for new windows and insulation. Every night before sleeping, he'd imagine the house waiting quietly, holding its breath until they came back. But something strange began to nag him around the third week. Dreams of that place, not peaceful dreams but vivid ones. In them, he would walk through the farmhouse at night and hear footsteps upstairs, the faint murmur of women's voices, laughter that echoed like memory. Sometimes he would wake drenched in sweat, convinced he'd heard the same laughter outside his apartment window, fading just as he opened his eyes. He told himself it was stress, nothing more. Houses that old had history. Maybe his mind was filling in ghosts where there were only creaks and shadows. Finally, the day came to return. He and Lily packed their things into the truck. Bedding, boxes, a little pink bicycle, and enough groceries for a few days. The drive back was quiet except for the hum of the engine. The air grew cooler as they neared Brookhaven. When the farmhouse appeared again through the trees, Ethan smiled, feeling that familiar warmth, but then he frowned. From a distance, he could see something odd. The curtains in the upstairs window were drawn. He was sure they hadn't been before. The house had been stripped bare, empty windows like hollow eyes, yet now one of them blinked with pale fabric. He slowed the truck at the gate. The old wooden fence he had tied with wire was unlatched. A soft trail of footprints led from the gate toward the porch, faint but fresh in the thin layer of dust that coated the path. His heart beat a little faster. Maybe the realtor came by, he muttered. though he didn't believe it. He stepped out, motioning Lily to stay inside. The wind was still, too still. Not even the grass moved. He climbed the porch steps, each one groaning under his weight. The front door, which he remembered nailing shut before leaving, was now open halfway. "Hello?" he called. His voice sounded strange in the heavy air. No answer came, only the slow creak of a loose shutter tapping against the wall. He pushed the door open. Inside, the house was no longer empty. A faint light flickered from somewhere deeper in the hall, maybe a candle or a small lamp. The air carried a new scent, lavender and smoke. His boots crunched over something soft. When he looked down, he saw an old blanket folded neatly by the doorway. His stomach tightened. Someone was living here. He moved carefully down the hall, past the kitchen where the jar of sugar was now gone. On the counter sat 2 chipped mugs, both warm, steam rising faintly. Whoever was here had been drinking tea moments ago. "Anyone here?" he called again, trying to keep his voice calm. He didn't want to scare them, maybe squatters or travelers. But the hairs on his neck rose when a sound floated down from upstairs. Laughter, light and musical, unmistakably 2 voices. One older, one younger. For a second, it almost sounded like joy, but there was something off, something too smooth, like echoes replayed through time. Ethan glanced back toward the door, thinking he should call the sheriff, but then another sound followed. A soft humming, like a lullaby. It drifted through the ceiling, wrapping around him. Lily's lullaby, almost the same tune he used to hum to her as a baby. His hands shook. He took one slow step onto the staircase, the wood crying beneath his weight. Halfway up, the humming stopped. The silence that followed felt alive, thick enough to choke on. When he reached the top, he saw light spilling from the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open. He nudged it with his foot and froze. 2 women stood in the middle of the room. One was older, maybe in her 40s, her hair tied back in a bun, wearing a faded dress that looked like it belonged in another century. The other was younger, barely 20, with long dark hair falling across her shoulders. They both turned at the same time, eyes wide but not frightened, as if they'd been waiting for him. The older woman spoke first, her voice calm and low. "You shouldn't have come back yet." Ethan's throat went dry. "Who are you?" "This is my house." She gave a small, knowing smile and said, "Yours?" "No, sir. This house remembers us." The younger one stepped forward, holding something small in her hand. It was an old photograph, edges yellowed, corners curled. She handed it to him without speaking. Ethan looked down and felt his stomach drop. The photo showed the same farmhouse, freshly painted, bright with flowers, and in front of it stood the same 2 women smiling at the camera. But the photograph was dated 1987. His eyes lifted slowly, meeting theirs again. The air around them shimmered faintly, as if heat waves rose from their skin. He stumbled backward, bumping into the wall. "This isn't funny," he said, though his voice cracked. "You need to leave before I call the police." The younger woman's expression softened. "We tried to leave once," she whispered. "The house wouldn't let us." The older woman placed a hand on her shoulder, her gaze locked on Ethan's. "Take your child and go, before it remembers her too." A loud crash echoed from downstairs, Lily's voice calling out, "Daddy!" Ethan spun and ran down the stairs, heart pounding. The living room was empty. The front door swung open in the wind, though he swore it had been shut. He ran outside, scanning the yard. Lily stood by the truck, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide. "I heard someone singing," she said softly. "She said my name." Ethan picked her up and hurried into the truck, starting the engine with shaking hands. The headlights swept across the porch. For a split second, he saw them standing there. The 2 women, side by side, watching silently, their faces calm but distant, like reflections in glass. Then, as the engine roared, they faded into shadow. Ethan didn't stop driving until the house vanished behind the trees. He tried to convince himself it was a misunderstanding, that they were squatters, maybe part of a local family that once lived there. But deep down, he knew something else was wrong, something beyond reason. As he drove, he reached for the photograph still clutched in his hand. He hadn't realized he'd kept it. In the beam of the dashboard light, he looked again, and his heart froze. Behind the two women in the photo, standing near the porch, was a small child, a girl about Lily's age, staring directly into the camera with the same stuffed rabbit in her arms. Ethan's hand tightened around the wheel. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the farmhouse calling to him from miles away, whispering softly through the wind, "You were never alone." Ethan didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, calm and unblinking, framed in that soft glow from the upstairs room. He sat in the driver's seat for hours outside a roadside motel, Lily asleep beside him, the stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. The photo lay on the dashboard, staring back at him like proof that he wasn't imagining it. The date on the corner haunted him, 1987. He turned the photo over, and on the back, written in delicate handwriting, were the words, "Home is where we wait." He didn't know what that meant, but it felt like a message left for him, or maybe a warning. By morning, he convinced himself it had to be some kind of trick. Maybe squatters pretending to be ghosts, maybe the town trying to scare him away from a cheap property. He needed to go back, not because he wasn't scared, but because he couldn't stand the idea of someone else being in Lily's home. He couldn't let fear own what was supposed to be their new beginning. He dropped Lily off at a neighbor's house outside town, promising he'd return by evening. She looked up at him with sleepy eyes and asked, "Are the ladies still there, Daddy?" His heart squeezed. "No, honey," he lied softly. "They're gone now." When he reached the farmhouse again, the morning fog still clung to the ground like a living thing. The house looked older than before, heavier somehow, as if it had aged overnight. The curtains upstairs were drawn tight, and the front door was closed. He parked his truck quietly, walked up the steps, and pushed the door open. Inside, everything was still, the air thick with that same faint scent of lavender and smoke. The two mugs were gone. The blanket by the door had disappeared. But on the kitchen table lay a new object, a small porcelain figure of a woman holding a child. He picked it up carefully, brushing away the dust, and noticed a small crack running down its side. It was warm to the touch. The floorboards creaked above him. He froze. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. He looked up and whispered, "Whoever you are, I'm not here to fight. I just want to know why you're in my house." No answer came, only silence thick enough to press against his chest. He walked toward the stairs, each step heavier than the last. At the top, he saw a faint shadow move down the hall, passing across the light spilling from the same bedroom. He followed it, his hands shaking. The room looked just like before. Old furniture covered in white sheets, dust dancing in the light, and that faint humming again, soft, familiar. It was the younger woman this time, standing by the window, her back to him, looking out toward the field. Her long hair moved gently in the breeze from the cracked glass. Ethan swallowed hard and said quietly, "Why are you here?" She didn't turn. "Because this is where we stayed," she said in a voice that sounded both near and far. "Where we loved, where we burned, where we waited." Ethan stepped closer. This house was empty. The agent said it was abandoned for years. The woman turned slowly then, her face pale but kind, eyes the color of storm clouds. "It's only empty for those who forget." Behind him, the older woman appeared in the doorway, her expression soft but serious. "You shouldn't have come back," she said again. "You've woken the house." Ethan's hands tightened at his sides. "I don't believe in ghosts," he said, his voice unsteady. "Then believe in memory," she replied, "because that's all we are now." She moved to the dresser, picked up an old photograph and held it out to him. "This was our home. My name was Sarah. That's my daughter, June." Ethan recognized their faces immediately. "You died here," he said quietly. Sarah nodded once, her eyes glistening with something like sorrow. "We thought it would be quick, but the fire didn't take us fast. We stayed, hoping someone would come. He never did." So the house kept us instead. Ethan's voice cracked. He. She looked toward the window. My husband. He built this house with his own hands. When it burned, he ran into the storm to get help but never came back. Some say he couldn't bear the guilt. Others say he saw us in the flames and followed. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know whether to pity her or run. Why me? Why my daughter? He asked. Sarah smiled faintly. Because you reminded the house what it felt like to love again. A soft cry echoed from down the hall. Faint, like a child calling for her mother. Ethan spun around, but the sound was already fading. The younger woman, June, looked at him with tears in her eyes. It's her, she whispered. She hasn't stopped calling since the night we died. The older woman placed a trembling hand over her mouth. She was small. She never understood why we couldn't open the door. Ethan backed away, shaking his head. This isn't real. None of this is real. But as he turned toward the hallway, he saw something that froze his blood, small, dark handprints smudged along the wallpaper, leading toward Lily's room, the one he'd promised to paint pink. The door to that room creaked open slowly, even though no wind moved through the house. He forced himself forward, every instinct screaming to leave. Inside the room, the walls were bare except for one small object hanging above the window. A child's dress, scorched and brittle with age, swaying gently as if stirred by invisible fingers. Beneath it lay a tiny wooden box. Ethan knelt down and opened it carefully. Inside were 3 small items: a burnt locket, a piece of ribbon, and a folded note. The note read, "To whoever finds this house, tell her we didn't mean to leave her alone." Tears stung his eyes. He didn't understand why, but sorrow filled his chest so deep it hurt to breathe. Behind him, June whispered softly, "You can still make it right." Ethan turned. How? But when he looked back, she was gone. Only the cold air remained, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. He stumbled downstairs, clutching the note, his vision blurring. The walls seemed to pulse with shadows, every creak sounding like a whisper. At the foot of the stairs, Sarah stood again, watching him. "You have a child," she said quietly. "Protect her. Do not let the house remember her name." Ethan's lips trembled. "What do you mean?" Sarah looked past him, her eyes distant. "The house loves what it loses. It might try to keep her too." A chill ran down his spine. He thought of Lily, her smile, her laugh. He turned toward the door, ready to leave, but then something made him stop. A faint voice, Lily's voice, echoing softly through the hall. "Daddy, she's nice. She says I can stay with her." His heart nearly stopped. "Lily?" he shouted, running outside. But the yard was empty, the truck still parked where he'd left it. Only the swing hanging from the old oak tree moved gently in the wind, creaking as if pushed by small, unseen hands. He ran to the truck, yanked open the door. Lily was there, fast asleep, the rabbit still in her arms. Relief flooded him so hard it made him dizzy. He gathered her close, whispering her name again and again until she stirred, blinking in confusion. "Daddy, what's wrong?" He couldn't answer. He just drove. The house faded behind them once more, swallowed by fog and distance, but its image stayed in his mind. Those 2 figures watching from the window as they left, the older one solemn, the younger one smiling faintly, as if saying goodbye or maybe just waiting for the next return. That night, as Ethan lay awake in the small motel bed, Lily breathing softly beside him, he turned the photograph over again. The words on the back seemed to shimmer under the lamplight, the ink darker than before. It no longer read "Home is where we wait." It now said, "She remembers you." His hand shook as he dropped it onto the table. Somewhere in the dark, faint and distant, came the sound of laughter. 2 women's voices, soft, echoing through the night like the memory of a promise that would not die. Morning came slow, gray clouds stretching across the sky like heavy curtains. Ethan hadn't slept at all. The sound of that laughter still echoed faintly in his head, like an old radio playing far away. He sat by the window of the small motel room, watching cars pass on the empty road, the photograph lying face down on the table beside him. He didn't dare look at it again. Lily stirred softly on the bed, hugging her rabbit, safe and unaware of the storm twisting inside her father's chest. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what to do. He had faced grief, loneliness, even starting over. But this was something he couldn't explain. By noon, he decided to go into town. He needed answers. The house had a history, and he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around here knew something, but no one wanted to say it aloud. Brookhaven looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Small shops, an old gas station, a church whose bell hadn't rung in years. People looked friendly enough until they heard which property he had bought. Then their smiles faded, their eyes darted away. It was like the whole town shared a secret sealed behind polite silence. He stopped at a small diner near the main road, the kind of place that smelled like coffee, dust, and old stories. A gray-haired man behind the counter looked up and nodded. "Morning," he said, wiping a mug. Ethan sat down at the bar and ordered coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he held the cup. "You're new around here," the man said casually, though his eyes were sharp. "Bought yourself a place?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, the old farmhouse out on Red Hollow Road." The man froze mid-motion, the rag slipping from his hand. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, in a voice that had lost all warmth, he asked quietly, "You say you bought that house?" Ethan nodded, uneasy. The man slowly sat down across from him. "Son, no one's lived there since the fire." Ethan frowned. "What fire?" The man's jaw tightened. 20 years back. Whole place went up in the middle of the night. Folks said it was an accident. Faulty gas heater maybe. But, well, not everyone believed that. He got up and walked to a drawer behind the counter, rummaging through old papers. When he came back, he held a folded newspaper clipping, edges yellow and brittle with age. He laid it on the counter. The headline read, "Mother and daughter lost in Brookhaven house fire." Beneath it, a grainy black and white photo showed the same two faces Ethan had seen in that house. His throat went dry. "That's them," he whispered. "Sarah and June." The old man nodded slowly. "Yeah, Sarah Thompson and her little girl. Good people." Sarah's husband was a carpenter. Built that farmhouse from the ground up. He was working night shifts when it happened. By the time he got there, the roof was gone. Some say he tried to go in, but... The man paused, shaking his head. "They never found his body either." Ethan stared at the article, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. "But I saw them," he murmured almost to himself. "I saw both of them." The man gave him a long look. "Son, grief plays tricks. That place has a way of holding on to pain. Every few years someone buys it, thinking they can fix it up. None of them last long. Some hear voices. Some see lights in the windows. A few just vanish." Ethan's voice was small. "You mean disappear?" The man nodded grimly. "One fella moved in about 6 years ago. Said he'd clean it up and flip it for profit. 3 weeks later, his truck was still in the driveway, door wide open, dinner on the stove, but he was gone. Only thing left was a note on the table. Said, 'She asked me to stay.'" The man leaned closer. "If you're smart, you'll leave that house to the dead." Ethan wanted to argue, but something inside him broke a little. "There's a child," he said quietly. "A little girl's voice. She called for her mother." The man's eyes softened. "That'd be June's voice. People say she still walks the halls, calling out, waiting for her mother to come back. They say Sarah's spirit won't rest until she finds her." Ethan rubbed his hands over his face, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't believe in ghosts," he said again, but it sounded weaker now. The man poured him another cup of coffee, sliding it across the counter. "Belief doesn't matter out here. The land remembers. Some places don't forget what they lose." He thanked the man and stepped outside, the wind colder than before. He looked back toward the direction of Red Hollow Road. The farmhouse wasn't visible from here, but he could almost feel it staring back at him through the miles, waiting. He got into his truck and sat for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. He could leave now, take Lily and start over somewhere else. No one would blame him. But then he remembered Sarah's words, the way her eyes had softened when she said, "Protect your child." He couldn't just walk away, not if something about that house could still reach for Lily. So, against every instinct screaming to run, Ethan drove back toward the farmhouse. The dirt road seemed longer this time, the trees pressing closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the truck. The house came into view just as the sky turned gold with evening. He parked at the edge of the yard and sat still, listening. No wind, no birds, just silence. Then, faintly, he heard humming again. That same lullaby, soft and distant, coming from upstairs. He stepped out, each breath visible in the cooling air. The front door creaked open by itself. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. He walked through the hall, his boots echoing softly. The wallpaper along the staircase looked darker now, water-stained, almost like smoke rising upward. He whispered, "Sarah?" And his voice sounded smaller than a whisper. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, from the top of the stairs, a small voice answered, "She's not here right now." Ethan froze. Standing there in the pale light was a child. A girl no older than 7, her dress singed at the edges, her hair tangled but shining like gold in the dim light. She looked at him with wide, innocent eyes, holding a stuffed rabbit that looked exactly like Lily's. "Where did you get that?" he asked softly. The girl smiled faintly. "She gave it to me." Ethan's chest tightened. "Who?" The girl tilted her head. "Your little girl. She said I could borrow it until my mama comes back." Ethan felt his knees weaken. "Where is she now?" "My daughter." The girl pointed toward the living room. "Playing. She said she wanted to see the pretty house." Ethan turned and ran, heart slamming against his ribs. The living room was empty, but the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from the floor. For a second, he heard Lily's laughter, faint and fleeting, blending with another voice, June's. He called her name again and again, his voice cracking. Then the laughter stopped. Only silence. Only that heavy, suffocating stillness. He spun around, but the child at the stairs was gone. He stumbled outside, calling for Lily, his voice echoing across the field. No answer came. Just as panic gripped him fully, a small voice called back faintly from behind the barn. "Daddy, I'm here." Relief hit him so hard he nearly collapsed. He ran toward her. She stood by the fence, smiling like nothing was wrong, holding her rabbit again. "I made a new friend," she said. "Her name's June. She said she likes my songs." Ethan dropped to his knees and hugged her tight, his body shaking. "Don't talk to her again. Okay? Don't ever talk to her." Lily looked confused, scared even. "But she's nice. She said she was lonely." Ethan didn't answer. He just carried her back to the truck, whispering prayers under his breath. As they drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. In the upstairs window, 2 figures stood watching. The woman and the child, their hands resting on the glass, faces calm, almost peaceful. And for a moment, Ethan could have sworn Sarah mouthed something he couldn't hear, but somehow understood. You can't save one without saving the other. That night, back at the motel, Lily fell asleep quickly, but Ethan couldn't close his eyes. He sat by the window again, staring out into the dark fields, wondering what kind of curse or sorrow could bind souls to a place like that. His hands trembled as he unfolded the newspaper clipping again. The corner was torn, and beneath the article, scrawled in handwriting faint but clear, was a line that hadn't been there before. "Come back alone." Night fell heavy over Brookhaven, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound and light together. Ethan sat alone in his truck, parked at the edge of the old farmhouse once more. The headlights off, the engine quiet. Lily was safe at the neighbor's house this time. He had promised himself he wouldn't bring her back until he understood what this place truly was. The air outside was thick with fog, the trees leaning over the dirt road like witnesses afraid to speak. For a long time he didn't move. He just watched the house. The upper windows were dark, but in the lower ones, faint glimmers of light moved slowly, the same soft, warm flicker he had seen before, like candles breathing. He stepped out of the truck, flashlight in hand, his boots crunching over gravel. The house loomed taller now, its old wood groaning in the wind. When he reached the porch, the door was already open, swinging gently as if welcoming him. He whispered under his breath, "You want me here, don't you?" and then pushed it wider. The inside was colder than he remembered, and the scent of lavender still lingered faintly, mixing with dust and smoke. The photographs he had seen earlier were gone. The mugs, the blanket, gone too. The place looked almost empty again, except for one new thing. Muddy footprints leading from the living room toward the back of the house. Small footprints, bare, belonging to a child. His chest tightened. He followed them slowly through the hallway until they stopped in front of the basement door. It was shut with an old rusted latch he didn't remember locking. Something inside whispered, "Don't open it," but another part of him, the part that had lost too much already, needed to know. He lifted the latch and pulled the door open. The hinges screamed. A thick, cold air rose from below, carrying the smell of burnt wood and iron. He shone his flashlight down the steps. The beam vanished halfway, swallowed by darkness. He took a deep breath and started down. Each step groaned like a warning. At the bottom, the beam of his flashlight landed on the old stone floor, cracked and uneven. The walls were covered with old newspaper scraps, blackened at the edges, some half torn away. He moved the light slowly, and then froze. In the far corner of the cellar, two wooden chairs sat side by side, their edges charred, melted together at the arms. Beneath them lay a circle of black ash, faintly shaped like two figures sitting close. His breath caught in his throat. He remembered Sarah's words. "We stayed, hoping someone would come." His hands shook as he crouched down. Among the ashes, something glinted faintly. He brushed away the soot and lifted a small golden locket, the chain broken, the metal warped by heat. Inside, two names were engraved, Sarah and June. Ethan's eyes burned. He closed the locket in his fist, his chest tightening until he couldn't breathe. The silence pressed around him like a weight. He whispered, "I'm sorry," though he didn't know why or to whom. Then, behind him, a floorboard creaked. He turned quickly, the flashlight trembling in his hand. At the base of the stairs stood the younger woman, June, her pale skin glowing faintly in the dark. Her eyes looked sad, not angry. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly. Ethan's voice cracked. "Why? What happened to you? Why can't you rest?" June stepped closer, her bare feet leaving no prints on the dusty floor. "Because the house remembers. Because love never left." Ethan swallowed hard. "You're trapped here." She nodded once. "Mama and I waited. We thought if we stayed long enough, he'd come back. But he never did. The fire took us before the morning came, and the house kept our waiting." She looked around the room, her expression full of sorrow. "Every time someone new comes, the house tries again. It makes us believe he's home. But he never is." Ethan's heart twisted. "Your father," he whispered. June nodded again, tears in her eyes. "He built this house for us. He promised we'd never be alone again." Her voice broke. He was wrong. She sank to the floor beside the burned chairs, her hands trembling as she touched them. "We stayed here every night. He was supposed to fix the heater that week. It sparked instead. The fire spread too fast. I remember her scream. I remember the heat. And then, nothing." Her voice faded to a whisper. "It hurts to remember." Ethan knelt beside her, his voice trembling. "What can I do to help you rest?" She looked up at him, her expression fragile, almost human again. "You can't help me, but you can help her." Ethan frowned. "Sarah?" "No," June whispered. "The house." She pointed toward the wall, where faint burn marks shaped like hands stretched upward. "It's alive in a way. It feeds on what it keeps. Memory, grief, guilt. It's not evil, just lonely. It doesn't know how to let go." He didn't understand, but before he could speak again, another voice filled the basement. Older, calmer, but colder than before. "She's telling the truth." Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, her figure glowing faintly, her eyes soft with sadness. We've tried to leave, but the house binds us to what we loved most. And now it's seen your daughter. Ethan froze. What do you mean? Sarah's face darkened with sorrow. She's like June. Bright, kind. The house will want to keep her too. Ethan's pulse pounded. No, he said firmly. You can't have her. Sarah shook her head. Not us. The house. It doesn't understand life or death. It just wants warmth again. The basement lights flickered suddenly, the air growing colder. June looked around, fear flashing across her face. It's awake, she whispered. You shouldn't have come back. Ethan turned toward the stairs, ready to run, but the door above slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the cellar like thunder. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment everything went dark. In the darkness he heard whispers, hundreds of them, voices overlapping, crying, pleading. The air felt thick, heavy with sorrow. When the light came back, Sarah was kneeling beside the burned chairs, her fingers tracing the scorched wood. He sat here every night, she said softly. After we died, he came back. He begged for forgiveness. He said he couldn't live without us. Ethan stepped closer, his voice shaking. Your husband. She nodded. He died here too. The house took him the moment he fell asleep. Ethan looked around the room again and noticed something new. A small box under the chairs, half covered in ash. He reached for it and pulled it free. Inside were several letters tied together with ribbon, the paper yellowed but intact. The handwriting was careful, trembling. He opened the first one and began to read. My dearest Sarah, I tried to fix what I broke. I tried to bring you back. But every night I hear your voice in the walls, and every day I see June in the shadows. I can't live like this. I'll stay here with you. I'm sorry. Ethan swallowed hard, tears burning in his eyes. He looked up, but both women were gone. Only the cold remained. He closed the box, his breath shaky. You were never alone, he whispered into the empty air. He was here all along. The basement lights dimmed once more, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw three shapes standing together in the corner. A man, a woman, and a child. Their hands linked, their faces calm. Then they faded like mist, leaving only silence. Ethan climbed the stairs slowly, the locket still in his hand. At the top, the door creaked open as if pushed by invisible hands. The air upstairs was lighter now, almost peaceful. But when he turned toward the hallway, his heart froze. On the wall, written in soot, were words that hadn't been there before. Thank you for finding us. He stepped outside into the cool night, the wind whispering through the trees. For the first time, the house didn't feel angry or haunted. It felt tired and at peace. He looked up at the dark windows, expecting to see faces, but there were none. Just his reflection staring back. As he turned to leave, he whispered, Rest now. But as he walked toward his truck, he thought he heard a faint voice behind him. A child's voice saying softly, Good night, Mr. Miller. He froze, tears filling his eyes, but he didn't look back. Some goodbyes were meant to stay unseen. He started the truck and drove away, leaving the farmhouse behind him, or so he thought. The next morning sunlight crawled through the motel blinds, thin and cold, but Ethan felt no warmth in it. He sat at the small wooden table, staring at the golden locket resting beside his coffee cup. He hadn't told anyone what happened in that basement. He couldn't. Words would never make sense of what he had seen. The ashes, the letters, the faces fading like candle smoke. Lily was drawing on the bed behind him, humming softly, the same lullaby that haunted the house. He turned slowly toward her, his heart aching. Where did you learn that song? She smiled, swinging her legs. From the lady in my dreams. She says it helps me sleep. Ethan's breath caught, his hand trembling as he reached for the locket. The past wasn't done with them yet. He decided that morning that he couldn't keep running. The farmhouse had taken too many lives, too many memories, and he could feel it reaching for his daughter now. Whatever secret still lived inside those walls had to be faced before it swallowed them both. He packed his tools, the letters from the cellar, and the locket, then drove back toward Red Hollow Road one last time. The sky darkened as he approached, clouds folding over the hills like smoke. The moment the farmhouse came into view, a strange calm settled in his chest, as if the house itself had been waiting. Inside, everything was silent. The air felt different, less hostile, more watchful. Dust floated in thin streams of light cutting through the broken windows. The smell of smoke still lingered, faint but sharp. Ethan stood in the living room listening. Somewhere above, the floorboards creaked softly, like someone walking carefully so as not to disturb him. He whispered, "I know you're here," and his voice echoed gently, almost like the walls were listening. He set his toolbox down and stared at the far wall, the one behind which the voices had seemed loudest. The paint there was bubbled and cracked from heat, but it called to him. Without thinking, he picked up a hammer and began to strike. Each swing echoed through the empty rooms like thunder. Pieces of plaster fell away, revealing something beneath. Not insulation, but paper. Old letters. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, folded and pressed into the gaps between the studs, sealed away decades ago. He pulled one free and opened it carefully. The handwriting was delicate, trembling. "My Sarah, I can still hear you. The nights are too quiet without your laughter. If you can see me, forgive me for leaving you in the fire. I tried to build heaven with my hands, but all I built was a tomb." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He opened another. "I've fixed the heater. It's safe now, I promise. Come home. Please come home." The letters were written over years, maybe by the husband who had survived. Letters never sent, never answered, all buried in the walls. He leaned against the wooden beam, overwhelmed. All the sorrow trapped in the house wasn't born of anger. It was love that couldn't die, guilt that couldn't fade. The farmhouse wasn't haunted, it was heartbroken. As he read, he realized that the walls had been holding these confessions all along, feeding on the pain, whispering it back through time. He could almost hear the man's voice, hoarse with regret, begging forgiveness from a family long gone. Then, as the wind shifted through the cracked window, something soft brushed his shoulder. He turned and saw Sarah standing near the doorway again, her eyes full of sadness and gratitude. "You found them," she said gently. Ethan nodded, his voice breaking. "He never stopped writing to you." She looked toward the letters scattered on the floor. "He never forgave himself. We heard his voice for years, calling through the boards, but we could never answer." Ethan wiped his face with the back of his hand. "You can now. It's time." Sarah stepped closer, her outline faint, her voice trembling like the wind. "He's still here, you know? Not in body, but in the breath of this place. Every nail, every wall. The house became him." Ethan felt a chill move through him as if the air itself had sighed. "How do I set him free?" he asked. She looked at the locket in his hand. "Give him what he always wanted, peace, forgiveness." He swallowed hard, then walked to the fireplace, where the hearth was still black with soot. He knelt, opened the locket, and placed it gently on the cold stone. He spread the letters around it one by one, like pieces of a prayer. Then he struck a match. For a moment, he hesitated, afraid the fire would awaken something darker. But then he remembered the child's voice, soft and lonely, and the way Lily had smiled in her sleep as if someone had been watching over her. He whispered, "Let it end." The flame caught slowly, crawling along the edges of the paper, turning old grief into glowing ash. The smoke rose in thin spirals, filling the room with the scent of burned ink and something sweeter, lavender. Ethan backed away, watching as the fire grew brighter, casting long shadows across the walls. For a second, he thought he saw shapes moving within the light. A man kneeling, a woman holding a child, their faces finally calm. The air warmed, humming softly, almost like a heartbeat. Then, just as suddenly, the fire died out. Silence returned, heavy but clean, as if the house had exhaled for the first time in decades. Ethan looked around, the walls bare now, their secrets burned away. The cracks looked deeper, the color faded, but there was peace in the emptiness. Sarah stood by the window, her eyes shimmering like morning dew. "Thank you," she whispered. "He's gone now. We can rest." Her voice trembled, almost fading into the wind. Ethan tried to speak, but no words came. He only nodded. June appeared beside her mother, holding her hand. She smiled softly, the same smile Lily had given him that morning. "Tell her we liked her song," she said quietly. Ethan's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "I will." Sarah looked at him one last time. "Be kind to this place. It remembers kindness." Then, as the first light of dawn spilled across the floor, both figures dissolved into the brightness, leaving behind only the faint scent of wildflowers and a deep, aching silence. Ethan stood there for a long time, unable to move. The farmhouse felt different now, lighter, warmer, alive in a gentler way. The creaks in the wood no longer sounded like whispers. They sounded like breathing. He picked up Lily's drawing that had somehow fallen from his pocket, a picture of a house with 3 smiling figures inside. He smiled faintly, folded it, and placed it in the mantel where the locket had burned. "You have your family back," he said softly. As he stepped outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, golden light spilling across the fields. The breeze carried away the smell of smoke, leaving only fresh air and the sound of rustling leaves. For the first time since he'd bought the farmhouse, Ethan didn't feel fear when he looked back. He felt something else. Peace, sadness, maybe love. He whispered, "Goodbye, Sarah. Goodbye, June." The old house stood quiet, its windows reflecting the sunrise, and somewhere deep inside, the faintest sound of laughter drifted through the halls, not haunting, but happy. For the first time in months, Ethan woke to silence that didn't feel heavy. The sun poured through the motel window in soft stripes, and the air smelled of morning rain. He turned and saw Lily still asleep beside him, her hair messy, her small hand resting on the stuffed rabbit she never let go of. She looked peaceful, untouched by the darkness her father had seen. He sat there for a while, watching her breathe, feeling a kind of calm he hadn't known since the day they lost her mother. But underneath that calm was something else. A pull, gentle but certain, calling him back to the farmhouse one last time. He didn't know if it was gratitude or guilt, but he knew he couldn't leave things unfinished. Some places deserve a goodbye. He waited until Lily woke. "Are we going home today?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Ethan smiled softly. "Soon. But Daddy has to visit the farmhouse first, just for a little while." She nodded, half asleep, trusting him without question. He dropped her off again at the neighbor's and promised he'd be back by afternoon. As he drove toward Red Hollow Road, the fields shimmered in the pale morning light. The fog that usually haunted that road had lifted, replaced by a thin golden mist that drifted lazily over the grass. For a strange moment, he felt the world breathing with him, slow and quiet. The farmhouse appeared around the bend, still worn but no longer frightening. Its broken windows caught the light, and the porch stood straight in the sun. The air felt lighter, as if the weight that had hung there for years had finally lifted. When he stepped inside, the floor didn't groan in protest. It sighed, like a place finally at peace. Dust sparkled in the air, and somewhere a bird sang from the rafters. The smell of smoke and lavender had faded into something new, something clean. He walked through every room in silence, tracing his hand along the walls where he had found the hidden letters. The plaster was cold but still. No whispers, no humming, only the gentle creak of an old house learning to rest again. In the living room, he found something lying near the hearth where he had burned the letters, a small shape half buried in ashes. He bent down and brushed the soot away. It was the porcelain figure he had found on the kitchen table days ago, the woman holding the child. It was whole now, the crack that once split it down the middle completely gone. He smiled faintly. "You fixed it," he whispered, his voice breaking a little. He set it gently on the mantel and stepped back. "I think you can stay together now." The wind moved softly through the open window, carrying the faint scent of flowers. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard laughter. Not eerie, but warm, like the sound of family at dinner. He closed his eyes and listened. The sound grew clearer, a man's deep chuckle, a woman's gentle hum, and a child's giggle blending together. It filled the room like sunlight. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't need to. He just whispered, "You're home." When he finally stepped outside, the sky was wide and blue. He stood on the porch for a long time, looking over the field where wildflowers had begun to bloom between the tall grass. He felt her presence there, Sarah, June, and the man who built this place. Not as ghosts, but as memories stitched into the land. The house no longer looked haunted. It looked alive again, old but proud, as if ready for someone to love it once more. Ethan sat on the porch steps, his hands clasped together. For the first time, he allowed himself to think of his wife, of the life he'd lost and the one he was still trying to rebuild for Lily. Grief had followed him here, and somehow, this broken house had taught him what to do with it. Not to erase it, but to let it rest. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he whispered, "Thank you." A soft wind answered, brushing his hair, almost like a hand patting his shoulder. He stood, walked to the truck, and turned back for one last look. The sun had reached the roof now, bathing it in light. He could see the upstairs window where he had first seen the two women standing. For a brief second, as the light shifted, he thought he saw them again. Sarah, June, and a tall man beside them. All three smiling from the window, their faces glowing faintly before fading into brightness. Ethan didn't feel fear. He smiled, nodded once, and whispered, "Goodbye, my friends." As he drove away, the rearview mirror caught the farmhouse shrinking behind him until it disappeared behind the trees. But just before it was gone completely, the reflection shimmered. For a heartbeat, he saw Lily's pink bicycle leaning against the porch, something he hadn't brought back. Then it was gone, replaced by empty sunlight. He didn't question it. Some things didn't need explaining. Some peace came only when you stopped asking why. When he reached the neighbor's house, Lily ran out to greet him, her laughter bright as the morning sky. "Daddy, I had another dream," she said excitedly. "The lady and her little girl said they're happy now. They said the house is safe." Ethan froze, his heart squeezing, but then he smiled and picked her up, spinning her in the air. "I think they are," he said softly. "I think they finally went home." That evening, they drove past the edge of town one last time. In the distance, where the farmhouse once stood surrounded by weeds, golden light shimmered across the windows like a silent promise. Lily looked out the window and waved. "Bye-bye, house," she said with a smile. Ethan looked once more and whispered under his breath, "Rest easy." The road curved away, and the house disappeared behind the hills. The sky above Brookhaven glowed orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt peace. Not the kind you chase, but the kind that finds you when you stop running. The farmhouse had given him back something he hadn't known he'd lost. Faith that broken things could still be made whole, that love could survive even the fire that destroyed it. He rolled down the window, letting the cool evening air fill the truck. Lily began humming that same old lullaby again. But this time, it didn't make him shiver. It made him smile. Her small voice filled the cab, soft and sweet, as the wind carried it away down the road. And somewhere behind them, miles away in that quiet farmhouse, maybe, just maybe, someone hummed along.